Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Hanging in there on this Tuesday morning.
It is very much a Tuesday, but that's why we're here because every day is part of our mental health.
For sure. Every day is a different day, which is always important too, I think.
Exactly. Good morning, everyone. We're here for Mental Health Awareness Month, so thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jessie Gold. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself for our audience?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jessie Gold. I'm a psychiatrist at Washington University in St. Louis. I'm an assistant professor and director of wellness engagement and outreach there, which basically means I see a lot of college kids and healthcare professionals and have been doing a lot of the COVID mental health stuff for the hospital. I also write, so I'm a freelance writer most often in Style and Self, but other places too.
Yeah, well, thank you. My name is Sasha Card. I'm the Associate Director of Education and Membership here at ADAA. So we're so happy to have you join us. We're going to talk about mental health and medication. I'm happy to be able to connect to start having this important conversation. So I thought we'd just kick it off. So with a very basic question, what does it mean to be mentally healthy?
It's such a good question. I mean, I think it's really person dependent, honestly. I think we talk a lot about mental health, like mental health awareness, and people either mean wellness and just like feeling good overall, or they mean mental illness, but there's not a lot of the in between. And I think it really just depends on the person. I think being mentally healthy has to do with sort of all spheres of life. So socially, at work, at home with your family, or by yourself, if that's what it is, with your friends, spiritually, if that's something that's important to you. So sort of all realms of wellness, or that could compose a healthy person mentally, feeling good. I mean, I think happiness tends to be what people think the goal of mental health is, but I think that that's not necessarily the goal, and it's a bit of a like hallmark goal, that all of us should be happy all of the time, but all of the emotions have purpose. So the goal of being mentally healthy is not to be happy all the time, but to like feel your feelings and be able to cope with them, I think.
I love that. We can't all be in a holiday movie, but we all can do our best and practice self-care.
For sure.
So we're here today because I did want to talk a bit about the stigmatization of medication and treatment and talking about your mental health. So in your opinion, why do you think there is a stigma surrounding mental health treatment and medication?
Oh, so long. I mean, I think it's been around for a while. So I think, probably before we even had medicines, I think that if a person saw a psychiatrist, they felt like psychiatry was forcing things on them that they didn't necessarily want. So there's a heavy stigma of the way psychiatry used to be, I would say pre-1970s, before there was sort of like a revolution in the way that we practiced inpatient psychiatry in particular, but also kind of moved forward from that into the 80s when we started to have medicine and be able to actually help people with drugs that worked beyond antipsychotics and things like that. So I think that there's this long-standing belief that all we're doing is pushing medicine on people and pushing medicine on people without their consent. So I understand where that comes from. I think as time has gone on, people have in the public become a lot more comfortable talking about therapy, and therapy has almost been like taken over by the wellness sphere. So like the wellness sphere is like, I'm going to go do yoga, do meditation, and go to therapy. And it's sort of like trendy and okay to talk about going to therapy. Of course, that's culturally dependent, like familially dependent. Like there are lots of reasons why you still might not talk about that, but there's a higher level of comfort with talking about therapy than meds, because I think people feel being on meds means that they have worse symptoms, or that people will judge them for what it means to need medicine, as opposed to just being able to, get by talking to someone, and that's all you need, right? And there's a lot more to medicine than just having worse symptoms, right? There's like genetics, or just the way it's working in your brain, and maybe it's more neurochemically related than just as like what's going on in your day-to-day life and your stressors. So I think we have a lot of belief that severity is linked with medication, and that's true in some sense, but it's not the only thing. And so people get worried about what it means to need meds or to be reliant on something like that for their mental health, and we just don't talk about it enough. So people don't notice that, Lexapro's a top 10 prescribed medicine in this country, and that, a lot of people are on medicine. It's not something we talk about enough, but a lot of people are on it, and a lot of the people you interact with day to day in your life, in your doctor's office, in your lawyer's office, in the grocery store, right? So all of these people are on meds. We just don't talk about it enough, so you feel pretty alone.
Yeah, I think that is a trend in kind of mental health, that feeling of kind of standing on your own and not being able to talk about it. So, say someone's struggling with their mental health, who should they start speaking to, and how do they start having those conversations to find out the options available with them, whether it is just the self-care route or the medication route?
For sure. I mean, I think it's important to talk to one person at least. So I think we think that, like, okay, I'm struggling, I have to tell everybody everything, or I have to tell everybody my whole story. And I think that comes from social media a bit, where there's like an urge to just be open and honest and authentic. And I think that's important. But if you're not ready to be open and honest and authentic with everybody, find that one person that you have in your life that has really been there for a lot of things and doesn't feel judgy and feels like someone who can listen. Pull them aside, say, I have to talk to you about something. It's been really hard for me to talk about, but I'd really like to talk to you, and tell them what you're dealing with. And, they might not be mental health experts, and they might say, like, hey, it sounds like you should consider talking to someone, or, we need to go find somebody for you to talk to. But I think it's a place to start by talking to friends or family, or somebody that you really feel close to, if that's a teacher or a coach too. And then from there, kind of saying, okay, what are my options? And I think we don't talk enough, like, people find it very confusing, like the mental health sphere, right? There's therapy, but there are like 50 people that call themselves therapists, right?
So
Different
why?
degrees, different types. How do you know? I think, like, if you don't know, starting with someone who looks like they do a lot is a good way to go. If you are like, I'm really struggling with anxiety, then when you look up someone, look for somebody who understands anxiety and treats anxiety. You might not know exactly what kind of therapy you want. There are lots of types too, which is confusing. But then when you go from therapy to meds, which is someone like me, some people that do what I do both therapy and meds, but not everybody. A lot of people just do the medication side. And I would say it's usually easiest to go friends and family, and then a therapist, unless you're can't sleep, can't get out of bed, not functioning, then I would start at the higher side of things and go to a psychiatrist first. But otherwise, it's nicer to kind of start on the one end of the spectrum and have them tell you, like, hey, it seems like meds might be beneficial, and listen to their advice, then to go right to meds, even though we do the same thing, which would be to say, hey, I don't think you need meds right now. I think therapy would make sense. And we kind of balance the skills with what we know. And we understand it's hard to find people and get in and know what's wrong. So happy to be that person, and often am that person. But that's sort of how I think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting fact, that a lot of people do have both therapists and psychiatrists, and they are kind of your wellness team. But then you have your teachers and your coaches, who also play such an important part in your life. This does kind of bring up a question that I would like to ask you, like, what physical symptoms should people be looking for if maybe they want to start talking about medication, to kind of put words to those feelings?
For sure. So I'll stick with like anxiety and depression specifically, but I'll give you some stuff for other things too. But anxiety and depression specifically, looking at how you're feeling mood wise and over time. So not just like today, but today, tomorrow, maybe for the next couple weeks even. Like, how have you been doing? Because all of us have bad days, and that's normal, right? But if you have a bad day you're not bouncing back from, and you're feeling low consistently, that's something to keep in mind. Interest in things is something else to pay attention to. So like when we say, are you interested in stuff? It's like, did you like to go running and feel better after you went running? And now when you go running, you're like, ugh, this thing again, right? So like this big change in what those activities kind of do for you is important to pay attention to. Then like physically, so sleep and eating are probably the ones to pay most attention to that are like physical kind of symptoms. So are you sleeping too much or sleeping too little, or eating too much or eating too little? So any change too, obviously, but those kind of things are important. With anxiety, you might also get a lot more physical symptoms like shortness of breath, stomach ache, like tension in your body, the things you think of when you like picture anxiety or like you try to talk about anxiety, that's probably exactly what would be happening to you. But anxiety can affect sleep and eating too, right? So like if you are anxious, you might have trouble falling asleep because when you lay down to go to sleep, you think about the 100 things you should be doing instead of sleeping. And anxiety can affect your like eating because you have stomach ache and you're not going to really want to eat, or you just don't feel hungry because you feel uncomfortable, right? And so paying attention to those kind of signs can be helpful. Obviously, on the more severe side of things, like if you have suicidal thoughts, that's something to pay attention to. I think we have them more than we talk about in culture. But if it's changed, if it's worsened, if you notice they won't go away, if they have intent, any of that stuff is much more like a sign to know something is wrong, that you might want to see a psychiatrist. Obviously, sort of the things I haven't discussed outside of anxiety and depression, things like, are you hearing or seeing things I can't hear or see, would be important. But really those things, if we're just sticking sort of with the bread and butter, like what do I see most, like would be the anxiety, depression side of stuff. And those would be the symptoms I would pay attention to.
I think that's very important because sometimes it's hard to kind of put real feelings into kind of diagnoses and symptoms and transforming that into something that people can understand.
For sure. I think it's been hard over the pandemic too, because everybody's like, I feel sad and anxious all the time. This is just the pandemic. And I think that's true in some ways. And I think we don't need to pathologize like existing in a world that is full of constant stressors, right? But I think the way to say, is this something I need to see a doctor for, or is this something that's just a reaction to life, is like, how long has it been going on? Is it getting worse? How much is it interfering with your day-to-day life? So all of us can just feel kind of like down about this whole thing. The world has a lot of stressors right now. But if feeling down makes it so you can't do things you want to do, or you're not like participating at work the way you want to, that's something to note and pay attention to too. So like, yeah, we all can feel a reaction to the existence of the pandemic, right? But how long is it going on? Is it getting worse? And how much is it interfering with my life are really good sort of markers of, is this something I need to be more concerned about and talk to someone like me or talk to a therapist?
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to keep this short, and I feel like I could talk to you for literally hours because you're right. During the pandemic, there has been such an increase in the demand for mental health, and those are important conversations to have and trying to make sense of it all. But if someone can like walk away from our brief conversation with like one key message that you want to send to the world, what would it be?
Sure. I mean, being on medication is normal and not a weakness. If it helps, I take medicine. I think it took me a long time to feel comfortable saying that out loud, which is weird because I tell everybody that it's totally normal and there's no stigma against medicine and it's great for you. But it took me until over the pandemic to be able to openly talk about that. I wrote a piece about it in InStyle, but really, like, it's totally normal. If you need it, it's something that helps you. If you had high blood pressure and somebody said, this medicine will make you not have high blood pressure, you wouldn't say, oh my gosh, I can't take that, then I'm going to look like X, Y, or Z to someone, right? You would take it because it would help you feel better. And that's the same with any medicine for like mental health related things too.
Yeah. And while we're here, we did have one audience question come in that
Sure.
I ask. If someone has an anxiety disorder, what should they keep in mind when managing their mental health?
that anxiety likes to take over in a lot of ways when you like sometimes least expect it. I think people really think that it's like trigger anxiety, but sometimes when you're at work, you push down the triggers and so you don't deal with it. And then the end of the workday, you're really exhausted or really anxious, and it doesn't make any sense because nothing happened at the end of the workday to make you really exhausted or really anxious. But actually, it sort of is the compounding of all the stuff you push down, and then your body's like, oh hey, remember me? So it's not always very clear that like you have a trigger and something happens. I think it's also important to keep in mind that anxiety is an evolutionary benefit, right? So the reason we're anxious is because as humans, we needed to run from a predator or make sure an environment was not like a place where predators hung out, right? So anxiety helps us know if an environment is safe or run from the thing that's chasing us. In a situation where we have a lot of anxiety, that like threat detector is off, right? We're like, oh, there's somebody coming right now, or this place isn't safe, and we never feel safe. So we're constantly on like fight or flight and running, right? And so that's why you feel so tired, or that's why you're not sleeping at night, because you go to sleep, the predator will get you, right? So all of these things make sense, but sort of our detectors get off when we have an anxiety disorder, and even in a time like the pandemic when it's hard to say like this is safe, I feel safe for everybody, but then if you have an anxiety disorder, that might be even worse, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. We are all kind of going through our own mental health journey, and I think one big step is having conversations like this where we're able to kind of buckle down and have these open conversations to destigmatize it, to say I'm on medication or I'm seeing a therapist, and let someone else know that they're not alone in their experience.
For sure. I saw someone asked if there's something to do at home to lessen anxiety. So it depends on what anxiety is like for you. So you'll see that people are like, here's how you cope, and like do this coping skill. I hate that because it pushes like somebody else's agenda on you or whatever is accessible at work onto you. I think it's really important to go like, what works for me? And then keep a list of that and realize that coping is sort of like a hobby. So the things have to help in different times and in different situations, but you might be so anxious at times that you can't remember like, oh, that works for me. So keeping a list can be helpful when your mind sort of gets taken over by anxiety. For anxiety, it's helpful to know what helps in the moment when I'm super anxious and what helps prevent anxiety in the long run. So prevention might be exercise, it might be mindfulness, it might be sitting at home and watching television, it might be journaling. But in the moment, it might be, okay, I'm really in my head. How do I get back into my body? And that might be noticing things around the room, noticing what you're feeling, noticing your senses. It might be, I keep stress putty on my desk and a stress ball, which to be honest, like if you're like, I do telehealth all day, you can't see my hands unless I do this, right? So I actually can play with it under the table in a visit if I'm feeling more stressed or something, and it keeps me more grounded, and you would have no idea I'm doing it. So things like that can be helpful to you to kind of keep around to make work or make the environment a bit better. I hope that helps the person who asked.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like we can have tons of questions come in. So I invite you to continue exploring ADAA and all the resources. Dr. Gold has plenty of resources, and be sure to follow her on Instagram as well. And I just want to say happy Mental Health Awareness Month, and continue to have these important conversations.
For sure. Thanks for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day, and thank you everyone else for joining us.
You too.
Bye.